The wisdom of failing to learn is undeniable. Organizations that do it well, on the other hand, are extremely rare. This disparity is not due to a lack of desire to learn. Managers in the vast majority of the businesses I've studied over the last 20 years, pharmaceutical, financial services, product design, telecommunications, and construction firms, hospitals, and NASA's Space Shuttle program, to name a few, genuinely wanted to help their organizations learn from failures in order to improve future performance. In some cases, they and their teams have spent many hours conducting after-action reviews, postmortems, and other similar activities. But, time and again, I saw that my arduous efforts yielded no tangible results. The reason was that those managers were approaching failure incorrectly. The majority of executives I've spoken with believe that failure is bad, of course. They also believe that learning from it is fairly simple. Ask people to reflect on what they did wrong and exhort them to avoid making similar mistakes in the future. Or, better yet, assign a team to review and write a report on what happened, which will then be distributed throughout the organization. These commonly held beliefs are incorrect. First and foremost, failure is not always a bad thing. It is sometimes bad, sometimes inevitable, and sometimes even good in organizational life. Second, learning from organizational failures is far from simple. Most companies lack the attitudes and activities required to effectively detect and analyze failures, and the need for context-specific learning strategies is underappreciated. Organizations require new and improved methods to go beyond lessons that are either superficial, procedures were not followed, or self-serving. The market simply wasn't ready for our great new product. This entails abandoning old cultural beliefs and stereotypical notions of success in favor of learning from failure. Leaders can begin by recognizing how the blame game impedes progress. The game of blame. In most households, organizations, and cultures, failure and fault are inextricably linked. Every child learns at some point that admitting failure means accepting responsibility. That is why so few organizations have adopted a psychologically safe culture in which the benefits of learning from failure can be fully realized. Executives I've interviewed in organizations ranging from hospitals to investment banks admit to being conflicted. How can they respond constructively to failures without instilling an anything-goes mentality? What will ensure that people strive to do their best work if they are not held accountable for their mistakes? This worry is founded on a false dichotomy. In reality, a culture that makes it safe to admit and report failure can, and in some organizational contexts, must, exist alongside high-performance standards. Look at the exhibit, A Spectrum of Reasons for Failure, to see why, which lists causes ranging from deliberate deviation to thoughtful experimentation. Which of these causes involves culpable behavior? The first item on the list, deliberate deviance, clearly deserves to be punished. However, inattention may not. If it is the result of a lack of effort, it may be blameworthy. However, if it occurs as a result of fatigue near the end of an excessively long shift, the manager who assigned the shift is more to blame than the employee. It becomes increasingly difficult to find culpable acts as we move down the list. In fact, a failure that results from careful experimentation and yields valuable information may be laudable. When I ask executives to consider this spectrum and then estimate how many of their organization's failures are truly blameworthy, their responses are typically in the single digits, perhaps 2% to 5%. When I ask how many are held accountable, they say, after a pause or a laugh, 70% to 90%. Unfortunately, many failures go unreported, and their lessons are lost as a result. Failure is not created equal. A sophisticated understanding of the causes and contexts of failure will aid in avoiding the blame game and implementing an effective strategy for learning from failure. Although there are an infinite number of things that can go wrong in organizations, mistakes are classified into three types: preventable, complexity-related, and intelligent. Failures that are avoidable in predictable operations. The majority of failures in this category can be classified as bad. They typically involve deviations from specification in tightly defined high-volume or routine operations in manufacturing and services. Employees can consistently follow those processes with proper training and support. When they don't, it's usually due to deviance, inattention, or a lack of ability. However, in such cases, the causes are easily identified and solutions are developed. Checklists are one solution, as in Harvard surgeon Atul Gawande's recent bestseller The Checklist Manifesto. Another example is the renowned Toyota production system, which incorporates continuous learning from minor failures, small process deviations, into its approach to continuous improvement. As most operations students are aware, When a team member on a Toyota assembly line notices a problem or even a potential problem, he or she is encouraged to pull a rope known as the Andon cord, which immediately initiates a diagnostic and problem-solving process. If the problem can be fixed in less than a minute, production can continue uninterrupted. Otherwise, production is halted, despite the revenue loss, until the failure is identified and resolved. Failures are unavoidable in complex systems. The inherent uncertainty of work causes a large number of organizational failures. A particular combination of needs, people, and problems may have never occurred before. Triaging patients in a hospital emergency room, responding to enemy actions on the battlefield, and running a rapidly expanding startup all take place in unpredictable environments. System failure is a constant risk in complex organizations such as aircraft carriers and nuclear power plants. Although serious failures can be avoided by adhering to best practices for safety and risk management, including a thorough investigation of any such events that do occur, minor process failures are unavoidable. To think of them negatively is not only a misunderstanding of how complex systems work, it is also counterproductive. To avoid consequential failures, small flaws must be identified and corrected as soon as possible. Most hospital accidents are the result of a series of small failures that went unnoticed and, unfortunately, lined up in the wrong order. Intelligent failures on the horizon. Failures in this category are rightly considered good, because they provide valuable new knowledge that can help an organization leap ahead of the competition and ensure its future growth, which is why Duke University professor of management Sim Sitkin refers to them as intelligent failures. They occur when experimentation is required, when answers are not known in advance because this particular situation has never been encountered before and may never be again. Discovering new drugs, starting a completely new business, designing a novel product, and testing customer reactions in a completely new market are all tasks that necessitate intelligent failures. Trial and error is a common term for the type of experimentation required in these settings, but it is a misnomer because error implies that there was ever a right outcome to begin with. The right kind of experimentation produces good failures quickly at the frontier. Managers who use it can avoid the unthinking failure of conducting experiments on a larger scale than is necessary. When the product design firm IDEO launched a new innovation strategy service, its leaders recognized this. Rather than assisting clients in designing new products within their existing lines, a process IDEO had nearly mastered, the service would assist them in developing new lines that would take them in novel strategic directions. Knowing that it had not yet figured out how to effectively deliver the service, the company began a small project with a mattress company and did not publicly announce the launch of a new business. Despite the fact that the project failed, the client did not change its product strategy. IDEO learned from it and determined what needed to be done differently. For example, it hired team members with MBAs who could better assist clients in starting new businesses and included some of the client's managers on the team. Strategic innovation services now make up more than a third of IDEO's revenue. Tolerating unavoidable process failures in complex systems, as well as intelligent failures at the frontiers of knowledge, will not lead to mediocrity. Tolerance is required for any organization that wishes to extract the knowledge provided by such failures. However, failure is still emotionally charged. Getting an organization to accept it requires leadership. Developing a learning culture. Only leaders can create and sustain a culture that discourages the blame game and makes people feel both comfortable and accountable for identifying and learning from failures. They should insist that their organizations develop a clear understanding of what happened, not of who did it, when things go wrong. This necessitates consistently reporting small and large failures, systematically analyzing them, and proactively looking for opportunities to experiment. Leaders should also send the right message about the nature of the work, such as, we're in the discovery business, and the faster we fail, the faster we succeed. I've discovered that managers frequently don't understand or appreciate this subtle but critical point. They may also approach failure in an inappropriate manner for the situation. For example, statistical process control, which uses data analysis to detect and correct unjustified variances, is ineffective at detecting and correcting random invisible glitches like software bugs. It also does not aid in the development of innovative new products. In contrast, while great scientists instinctively follow IDEO's slogan, fail often in order to succeed sooner, it would hardly promote success in a manufacturing plant. In a manufacturing plant, the slogan, fail often in order to succeed sooner, would hardly promote success. Often, one context or type of work dominates an enterprise's culture and shapes how it views failure. Automotive companies, for example, with their predictable, high-volume operations, understandably see failure as something that can and should be avoided. However, most organizations do all three types of work mentioned above: routine, complex, and frontier. Leaders must ensure that the proper approach to learning from failure is used in each situation. Failure teaches all organizations three essential lessons: detection, analysis, and experimentation. Identifying failure. It is simple to identify large, painful, and costly failures. However, in many organizations, any failure that can be concealed is concealed so long as it is unlikely to cause immediate or obvious harm. The goal should be to catch it early, before it becomes a disaster. Alan Mulally instituted a new system for detecting failures shortly after arriving at Ford from Boeing in September 2006. He asked managers to color-code their reports, a common management technique: green for good, yellow for caution, and red for problems. According to a 2009 Fortune article, during Mulally's first few meetings, all of the managers coded their operations green, much to Mulally's chagrin. He reminded them that the company had lost several $1 billion the previous year and asked bluntly, "Isn't anything not going well?" Mulally responded to the deathly silence that ensued after one tentative yellow report about a serious product defect that would almost certainly delay a launch with applause. Following that, the weekly staff meetings were vibrantly colored. That story exemplifies a widespread and fundamental issue. Despite the existence of numerous methods for identifying current and impending failures, they are vastly underutilized. Total quality management and soliciting customer feedback are well-known methods for identifying flaws in routine operations. Through early detection, high reliability organization (HRO) practices help prevent catastrophic failures in complex systems such as nuclear power plants. Électricité de France, which owns and operates 58 nuclear power plants, has been a model in this regard. It goes above and beyond regulatory requirements by religiously monitoring each plant for anything out of the ordinary, immediately investigating anything discovered, and informing all of its other plants of any anomalies. Such methods are not more widely used because far too many messengers, including the most senior executives, are hesitant to deliver bad news to bosses and colleagues. When he joined the management team of a large consumer products company, one senior executive I know had serious reservations about a takeover that was already in the works. However, oblivious to his newcomer status, he remained silent during discussions in which all of the other executives appeared to be enthusiastic about the plan. Many months later, after the takeover had clearly failed, the team met to discuss what had occurred. Each executive, with the assistance of a consultant, considered what he or she might have done to contribute to the failure. The newcomer apologized openly for his previous silence, explaining that the enthusiasm of others had made him unwilling to be the skunk at the picnic. In researching errors and other failures in hospitals, I discovered significant differences in nurses' willingness to speak up about them across patient care units. It was discovered that the cause was the behavior of mid-level managers, how they responded to failures and whether they encouraged open discussion, welcomed questions, and displayed humility and curiosity. I've noticed the same pattern in a variety of organizations. The 2003 explosion of the Columbia Space Shuttle, which killed 7 astronauts, Facing Ambiguous Threats, by Michael A. Roberto, Richard M. J. Bomer, and Amy C. Edmondson, HBR November 2006, is a horrific case in point. NASA officials spent 2 weeks downplaying the significance of a piece of foam breaking off the left side of the shuttle during launch. They turned down engineers' requests to resolve the ambiguity, which could have been accomplished by having a satellite photograph the shuttle or requesting that the astronauts conduct a spacewalk to inspect the area in question, and the major failure went largely undetected until its fatal consequences 16 days later. Ironically, program managers' shared but unsubstantiated belief that there was little they could do contributed to their inability to detect the failure. Post-event analyses suggested that they may have taken beneficial action. However, it was clear that leaders had not established the necessary culture, systems, and procedures. Teaching people in an organization when to declare defeat in an experimental course of action is one challenge. The human tendency to wish for the best and avoid failure at all costs interferes, and organizational hierarchies exacerbate it. As a result, failing R&D projects are frequently kept alive for far longer than is scientifically or economically prudent. We toss good money after bad, hoping to pull a rabbit out of a hat. Although intuition may tell engineers or scientists that a project has fatal flaws, the formal decision to declare it a failure may take months. Again, the solution is to reduce the stigma of failure, which does not have to take much time or money. Since the early 1990s, Eli Lilly has done this by hosting failure parties to honor intelligent, high-quality scientific experiments that fail to produce the desired results. The parties are inexpensive, and redeploying valuable resources, particularly scientists, to new projects sooner rather than later can save hundreds of thousands of dollars while also kick-starting potential new discoveries. Examining failure. Once a failure has been identified, it is critical to look beyond the obvious and superficial causes to determine the root causes. This necessitates the discipline, better yet, the enthusiasm, to employ sophisticated analysis to ensure that the appropriate lessons are learned and remedies are implemented. Leaders must ensure that their organizations do not simply move on after a failure, but instead dig in and discover the wisdom contained within it. Why is failure analysis so often overlooked? Because examining our failures in depth is emotionally painful and can erode our self-esteem. Most of us, if left to our own devices, will rush through or avoid failure analysis entirely. Another reason is that analyzing organizational failures necessitates inquisitiveness and openness, as well as patience and tolerance for causal ambiguity. Managers, on the other hand, are typically admired and rewarded for decisiveness, efficiency, and action, rather than thoughtful reflection. That is why having the right culture is critical. The challenge is not only emotional, it is also cognitive. Even if we don't realize it, we all prefer evidence that supports our existing beliefs over alternative explanations. When we fail, we also tend to downplay our own responsibility and place undue blame on external or situational factors, only to do the opposite when assessing the failures of others, a psychological trap known as fundamental attribution error. According to my research, failure analysis is frequently limited and ineffective, even in complex organizations such as hospitals, where human lives are at stake. Few hospitals systematically examine medical errors or process flaws in order to learn from failure. Recent research in North Carolina hospitals, published in the New England Journal of Medicine in November 2010, discovered that, despite a dozen years of increased awareness that medical errors cause thousands of deaths each year, hospitals have not become safer. Fortunately, there are shining exceptions to this pattern, giving hope that organizational learning is possible. Physician deviations from medical protocols are routinely analyzed for opportunities to improve the protocols at Intermountain Healthcare, a system of 23 hospitals serving Utah and southeastern Idaho. Allowing deviations and sharing data on whether they result in a better outcome encourages physicians to participate in this program. See Richard M. J. Bomer's Fixing Healthcare on the Front Lines, HBR April 2010. Motivating people to understand second and third order reasons beyond first order reasons, procedures were not followed, can be difficult. Using interdisciplinary teams with diverse skills and perspectives is one way to accomplish this. Complex failures, in particular, are the result of multiple events occurring in different departments, disciplines, or organizational levels. Understanding what happened and how to avoid it in the future necessitates in-depth team-based discussion and analysis. Months were spent analyzing the Columbia disaster by a team of leading physicists, engineers, aviation experts, naval leaders, and even astronauts. They proved not only the first-order cause, a piece of foam had hit the shuttle's leading edge during launch, but also the second-order causes. NASA's rigid hierarchy and schedule-obsessed culture made it especially difficult for engineers to speak up about anything other than the most fundamental concerns. Experimentation should be encouraged. The third critical activity for effective learning is producing failures strategically, in the right places and at the right times, via systematic experimentation. Researchers in basic science understand that, while some experiments will yield spectacular results, a large percentage of them, 70% or higher in some fields, will fail. What motivates these people to get out of bed in the morning? First, they understand that failure is an unavoidable part of their work. It is part of being on the cutting edge of scientific discovery. Second, they understand, far more than most of us, that every failure conveys valuable information, and they're eager to get it before the competition. Managers in charge of piloting a new product or service, on the other hand, a classic example of business experimentation, typically do everything possible to ensure that the pilot is perfect right out of the gate. Ironically, this desire to succeed may later jeopardize the official launch's success. Managers in charge of pilots frequently design optimal conditions rather than representative ones. As a result, the pilot does not produce knowledge about what will not work. Too often, pilots are conducted under ideal rather than representative conditions. As a result, they are unable to demonstrate what will not work. In the early days of DSL, A major telecommunications company called Telco launched the high-speed technology to consumer households in a major urban market on a large scale. It was a complete disaster in terms of customer service. The company failed to meet 75% of its commitments and was confronted with a staggering 12,000 late orders. Customers were irritated and frustrated, and service representatives couldn't even begin to answer all of their calls. Employee morale suffered as a result. How could this happen to a market leader with high customer satisfaction and a brand that has long stood for excellence? A small but extremely successful suburban pilot had lulled Telco executives into a false sense of security. The problem was that the pilot did not reflect real-world service conditions. It was staffed by unusually personable, expert service representatives and took place in a community of educated, tech-savvy customers. But, unlike traditional telephony, DSL was a brand new technology that had to interface with customers' highly variable home computers and technical skills. This increased the complexity and unpredictability of the service delivery challenge in ways that Telco had not anticipated prior to the launch. A more useful Telco pilot would have tested the technology with limited support, inexperienced customers, and old computers. It would have been designed to discover everything that could go wrong, rather than proving that everything would go right under the best of circumstances. Of course, the executives in charge had to understand that they would be rewarded not for success, but for producing intelligent failures as quickly as possible. In short, exceptional organizations go beyond detecting and analyzing failures to create intelligent ones with the explicit goal of learning and innovating. Managers in these organizations do not relish failure. However, they acknowledge it as a necessary byproduct of experimentation. They also recognize that they do not need to conduct large-scale experiments. A small pilot, a dry run of a new technique, or a simulation is often sufficient. The courage to confront our own and others' flaws is critical to resolving the apparent contradiction of not discouraging problem reporting while also creating an environment in which anything goes. This means that managers must encourage employees to be courageous and speak up, rather than responding with anger or strong disapproval of what may appear to be incompetence at first. Complex systems are often at work behind organizational failures, and their lessons and opportunities for improvement are lost when conversation is stifled. Savvy managers recognize the dangers of unbridled toughness. They understand that their ability to learn about and solve problems is dependent on their ability to learn about them. However, most managers I've met in my research, teaching, and consulting work are far more concerned with a different risk: that an understanding response to failures will simply create a lax work environment where mistakes multiply. This widespread concern should be replaced by a new paradigm that acknowledges the inevitability of failure in today's complex work organizations. Those who recognize, correct, and learn from failure before others do will be successful. Those who play the blame game will not. Like, subscribe, get notified.